Welcome to Frontrunner Motorsport.
Hello and welcome to Frontrunner Motorsport and another top 10 list. Today looking at the best 10 Formula 1 drivers to ever come from the nation of Sweden. I have already done lists on Brazil and Finland, so remember to check those out, and if you disagree with anything I say, or everything even, then leave a comment down below. But for today, let us move to Scandinavia and take a look at the top 10 Swedes in Formula 1 ever. Number 10, Bertil Roos. Hands up if you have ever heard of Bertil Roos. Now put them back down again, you liar. Unless you are a relative of Bertil Roos, then I apologise, but you are probably still lying. Bertil Roos has a single race in Formula 1, racing for the Shadow team in the 1974 Swedish Grand Prix. He would qualify 23rd of 28 cars and then retire 2 laps in with gearbox troubles. But he would lose the drive to Tom Pryce due to the fact the Shadow team didn't like him very much. Seems a bit petty, but Bertil would have some success in Can-Am racing in America, winning the 2-litre class in 1982 and 1983, but wouldn't have much success beyond that. Number 9, Conny Andersson. Conny Andersson started out in motocross, not the natural route to Formula 1, but it was made via Swedish Formula 3, which Conny won twice in 1972 and 1974. His one and only actual start in Formula 1 was with the Surtees team in 1976 in the Dutch Grand Prix, when he qualified 26th of 27, barely getting in by the skin of his teeth. The race did not go great, retiring on lap 9 with an engine problem, and that was to be it for 1976. But for 1977 he moved to the BRM team. The classic team was on their final legs, dying at the end of the year. They did not go out gracefully. The team only qualified twice out of 8 attempts in 1977. Conny Andersson was 4 of those attempts and would not start another Formula 1 race. Number 8, Torsten Palm. Torsten Palm started out in rallying as a co-driver for his older brother and came second at the Rally of Sweden in 1967 with the original Flying Finn, Simo Lampinen. He'd move on to single-seaters in Swedish Formula 3, winning the championship 2 years in a row in 1970 and 71, and raced in European Formula 2 in 1973 and 74. He'd buy a Hesketh Formula 1 car and enter it himself in 2 Grand Prix, with sponsorship money from Polar Caravans. But it was hard to put in a fast lap time when you're pulling a caravan around, let me tell ya. Anyway, first up was Monaco, and Torsten Palm would fail to qualify, missing out by 3 seconds, but he had another go at the Swedish Grand Prix that year, which Polar Caravans were also sponsoring. This race went much better, with Torsten Palm out-qualifying more experienced drivers, such as Lella Lombardi, Vern Chapin and Wilson Fittipaldi, and he'd finished the race 10th, just 2 laps down, although not seeing the flag due to running out of fuel right at the end of the race. This would be the last F1 race for Torsten Palm. Not much happened after, and he retired from racing and ran a Ferrari garage in Sweden. Number 7, Slim Borgard. If this was a list of best Formula 1 drummers, then Slim Borgard would be top dog, even getting to play with ABBA, who later sponsored his Formula 1 car, just not with money. Hell, if it was even best truck racers who also raced in Formula 1, that's a pretty small list, and Slim would top that too. But in a list of best Swedes, he barely manages to grab 7th place. But it was with the teams at the back of the grid when he could get on the grid at all. But Slim Borgard is the first Swede on this list who actually scored a point. His early career was spent racing nationally in Sweden, racing in touring cars and Swedish Formula 3, another driver on this list to win the championship in 1979. It would be in 1981 when he'd make his Formula 1 debut with the German ATS team at the San Marino Grand Prix, when he would finish 13th. But he was last to qualify and last to finish. He'd failed to qualify for the next 4 Grand Prix before getting on the grid for the British Grand Prix. A lot of the front runners would experience trouble in this race, allowing our boy Slim to get a 6th place finish and a whole point to call his own. He'd qualify for the next 5 races, but a single 10th place was his only finish, before failing to qualify in Canada. In 1982 he moved to the Tyrrell team, but was dumped after 3 races when his sponsorship money ran out. He'd moved to the aforementioned trucks and win that championship in 1995 whilst driving for Mercedes. Number 6, Marcus Ericsson. The most recent driver on the list, and a driver who I honestly don't understand how he keeps getting work. Money, I am guessing. His Formula 1 career started in 2014 for Caterham, spending the entire year driving around the back of the grid with a best 11th at Monaco. He'd spend the next 4 years with Sauber, being outscored by his teammates, having spins all on his own, and generally not being very good. His biggest achievement is lasting 5 years in Formula 1, and in 2019 moved to the IndyCar Championship, where he has been better, getting a 2nd place, but he still hasn't finished higher than 17th in a series since his GP2 campaign in 2013. Number 5, Reine Wisell. Another Swedish Formula 3 champion, this time in 1967, but his best work was on his debut for Lotus in 1970 at the American Grand Prix, when he got a podium on his debut. Lotus, however, would not be as competitive in 1971, and whilst Wisell would score regular points, he'd only managed 12th overall. He'd never scored points in Formula 1 ever again, moving to BRM in 1972, only finishing the Italian Grand Prix in 12th, 4 laps down before moving back to Lotus for the last 2 races. With his last race finished with 10th in America, he would have a single race in 1973 with a random team, Clark, Mordaunt, Guthrie, Derlisher. Sounds like they make big, high-end sofas, but apparently they were stockbrokers. He retired anyway, as he would in 1974 after a race with March, and that was that for Reine Wisell. Number 4, Joe Bonnier. Now we are getting into the real meat and potatoes. The first Swede to ever enter Formula 1 all the way back in 1956, retiring a Works Maserati at the Italian Grand Prix. He'd continue racing Maseratis for either himself or Central Sud, but wouldn't score his first points until a 4th place finish for the Owen Racing organisation in 1958 at the only Moroccan Grand Prix. At the 3rd race of the 1959 season, he'd take his only win at the Dutch Grand Prix, beating Jack Brabham, but would only have 1 other points finish at the German Grand Prix. And 1960 was pretty terrible. 2 points finishes but a run of 5 retirements, and Joe Bonnier moved to the Porsche team in 1961. Porsche's time is brief in Formula 1, and Joe Bonnier would only score the odd points finish before moving on to the Rob Walker Racing team. He scored 6 points in 1963, again with just a smattering of points finishes, but only 2 more in 1964 and no points in 1965. After that, he'd only raced for his own race team and no full seasons from this point. He'd score his last points in 1968 before finishing up in Grand Prix racing in 1971 with a 16th in America. Sadly, he would be killed a year later at the 24 Hours of Le Mans after his Lola collided with a Ferrari driven by Swiss amateur Florian Vetch, and Bonnier was flipped over the Armco into the trees. Number 3, Stefan Johansson. This guy had a long career in Formula 1, starting with Shadow in 1980 when he failed to qualify in Argentina and Brazil, 10 seconds off pole in the latter. It would be 3 years before he'd get another chance when he was honoured by being one of 3 drivers who drove for the woeful Spirit Racing team, getting a best 7th place in Netherlands somehow. In 1984 he'd have a few races for Tyrrell before moving to Tolman and scoring his first points, with a 4th in Italy. But would not race for the team in 1985 when they couldn't get a tyre agreement, and after one more race with Tyrrell would replace René Arnoux with the Ferrari team. He almost won his 2nd race with Ferrari if he hadn't run out of fuel. But in 2 years he would score 6 podiums but no wins. He'd moved to McLaren for 1987 and again score 5 podiums and finish 6th overall, but would then start to move further back down the grid. A move to Ligier in 1988 would yield no points, and regularly Johansson would fail to qualify for races. A move to Onyx for 1989 didn't improve matters. He failed to qualify for 8 races, retired from 4 more, was disqualified from 1, but did manage a 5th in France before a miracle podium in Portugal. He'd entered the first 2 races of 1990 with Onyx but not qualified for either race, and failed to qualify for AGS in the first 2 races of 1991 before entering his final 4 races with footwork, qualifying for the Canadian Grand Prix but retiring on lap 48 with throttle issues. After Formula 1 he'd race in the kart series in America and win at Le Mans in 1997 in a Jost Porsche. Not a bad career to look back on. Number 2, Gunnar Nilsson. The career of Gunnar Nilsson was tragically short, and not for the same reasons as a lot of his peers in the 1970s. 2 years with the Lotus team in 1976 and 1977 led to 4 podiums, including a race win in Spa. Performances towards the end of 1977 were not good, retiring from the last 8 races. In fact, he was going to be replaced at Lotus by a fellow Swede. He was set to sign for Arrows in 1978, but in 1977 he was diagnosed with testicular cancer. He spent the last year of his life working on his cancer foundation and refusing painkillers so he could keep working as long as possible. Sadly, he would pass away in 1978 after a very short Formula 1 career that showed so much promise. Had it continued, who knows how far he could have gone. And number 1, Ronnie Peterson. It is sad to think that the best 2 Swedish racing drivers both died within a month of one another. Although Ronnie Peterson had a longer and more successful career, debuting for Colin Crabbe Racing in 1970, a small privateer outfit, the best Peterson could do was 7th at Monaco. He would do much better in 1971 with the March team, scoring 4 second places on his way to 2nd in the championship, although some way off Jackie Stewart. His second year with March in 1972 wasn't as competitive. Despite a podium at the German Grand Prix, he'd only managed 9th overall in the standings. He'd moved to Lotus for 1973 and after a bad start would take his first Grand Prix win at the French Grand Prix, followed by 3 more in the last 4 races, and a 3rd overall in the final standings, behind Jackie Stewart and teammate Emerson Fittipaldi. Despite taking 3 more wins in 1974 and a final 5th in the standings, Lotus had a bad year in 1975 and Ronnie Peterson would score just 3 points finishes, and after racing at the first race in 1976 with Lotus, would jump back to the March team for the rest of the year. The car was unreliable and retired from most races, but after points in Austria he'd take a win in Italy. In 1977 he'd moved to Tyrrell, but the team were on the descent through the field and a single podium in Belgium was all he could manage, but after replacing Gunnar Nilsson at Lotus for 1978, things were looking up. The Lotus was competitive and Peterson would spend a year fighting teammate Mario Andretti for the title. A win in South Africa, 4 podiums in a row in the mid-season, and his final win in Austria and a 2nd place in the Netherlands kept things tight. But the title was decided in Italy when a mistake by Riccardo Patrese led to a huge crash that severely injured Peterson, who would later die in hospital. Sadly, Gunnar Nilsson was deeply affected by the death of close friend Peterson and would lose his life a month later to cancer. And just to add to the tragedy, Peterson's wife committed suicide, having never gotten over the loss of her husband. Andretti won the championship with just 13 points more than Peterson with 2 races left in the series. There is a real chance had Peterson survived, he could have been champion. Of the 12 Grand Prix won by Swedish drivers, Peterson won 10 of them, and is the greatest Swede in Formula 1 history. So that's the list. It's a shame to end it on a sad note, but if you don't know the full story of Ronnie Peterson, you should check it out. It's a heart-wrenching one. But that is another video done. If you enjoyed, then please leave a comment, a like, subscribe, and hit the bell. I have Twitter, so look in the description for that. There will be more motorsport content on the way. I release 3 or 4 videos a week, so stay tuned and have a good one.